Every single morning, you are throwing a literal gold mine straight into the trash. I'm talking about those eggshells you toss in the bin without a second thought. But here's the kicker. Most of the advice you've heard about using them in your garden is a flat-out lie. You've probably been told to just crush them up and sprinkle them around your tomatoes, right? Well, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but if you do that, those shells will still be sitting there, fully intact, 3 years from now while your plants starve for nutrients. I've spent over 15 years with my hands in the dirt, consulting for organic farms and helping folks turn their backyards into high-yield sanctuaries. I've seen people spend hundreds of dollars at big box stores on calcium boosters and soil conditioners when the solution was sitting in their breakfast scramble all along. The problem isn't the eggshells. It's that nobody ever taught you the bioavailability secret. Your plants aren't like us. They can't just chew on a piece of shell. They need that calcium broken down into a form they can actually drink. Most gardeners are basically giving their plants a steak and wondering why they aren't eating it when the plants don't even have teeth yet. It's frustrating to watch your hard work wither away, especially when the fix is currently sitting in your kitchen garbage can. Think about the last time you saw blossom end rot on your tomatoes. Those ugly, black sunken spots on the bottom of the fruit. That's a cry for help. It's a calcium deficiency that's costing you your harvest and your hard-earned money. But before you run out and buy a 20-pound bag of lime or some expensive chemical spray, stick with me, because there is a way to turn those kitchen scraps into a high-octane garden fuel that works almost instantly. The secret starts with how you prep the shells. Most people just give them a quick rinse, if they're lucky, and crunch them by hand. That's your first mistake. To actually unlock the white gold hidden inside that shell, you have to change its physical state. We are looking for a powder so fine it looks like flour. I'm talking about a consistency that can disappear into the soil and bond with the water molecules immediately. If you aren't doing this, you're just burying trash in your garden and hoping for a miracle. I know it sounds like an extra step, but when you see the size of the peppers you'll be pulling off the vine this summer, you'll realize why every master gardener I know keeps a coffee grinder in their potting shed. It's the difference between a garden that just survives and a garden that actually thrives. But even a fine powder isn't the whole story. There's a specific acid activation trick that most people completely miss, and without it, that powder just sits in the soil like a rock. You need to trigger a chemical reaction before it ever touches your dirt. It's a simple household hack that costs pennies, but it's the bridge between a shell and a super nutrient. Now, you might be wondering exactly how to turn that stubborn shell into a liquid gold fertilizer that acts faster than anything you can buy in a bottle. Well, that's where things get really interesting, because the most powerful way to use an eggshell isn't even in the soil. It's actually what you do with the water. So, how do we actually unlock that calcium? If you just toss a powdered shell into the dirt, it's still essentially a rock. It takes years for soil microbes to break down calcium carbonate into a form a plant can drink. But here's the trick that professional organic growers use to bypass that wait time entirely: water-soluble calcium, or WCA. It sounds like a lab experiment, but you can do it right on your kitchen counter with a bottle of plain old white vinegar. When you take those toasted, crushed eggshells and drop them into vinegar, you'll see them start to bubble and fizz. That's the magic happening. The acetic acid is literally ripping the calcium out of the shell and suspending it in the liquid. After about a week, you strain that liquid, dilute it, and you've got a professional-grade foliar spray that stops blossom end rot in its tracks. I'm telling you, I've seen plants that looked like they were on death's door bounce back in 48 hours because they could finally inhale the calcium through their leaves. Now, you might be asking, Porter, what if I don't want to play chemist? Well, that brings us to the second genius hack that most people ignore: the seedling starter pot. If you're still buying those little plastic seed starting trays every spring, you are throwing money into a hole. Next time you crack an egg, try to keep the bottom half of the shell intact. Poke a tiny pinhole in the bottom for drainage. Fill it with a little seed starting mix, and drop your seed right in. It's the ultimate biodegradable pot. When that seedling is ready to go into the ground, you don't even have to take it out. You just give the shell a gentle squeeze to crack it, so the roots can get out, and bury the whole thing. It's zero waste, zero cost, and it protects those delicate baby roots from transplant shock. It's one of those, why didn't I think of that? Moments that will save you $20 every single season. But it gets even better. We've talked about feeding the plants, but what about the things that are trying to eat your plants? If you've ever walked out to your garden only to find your prize-winning hostas or lettuce looking like Swiss cheese, you know the heartbreak of a slug infestation. Most people reach for those blue chemical pellets, but those are toxic to birds, pets, and the very soil you're trying to build. Instead, you want to use your eggshells as a barbed wire fence. But here's the secret. For this to work, the shells shouldn't be powdered. You want them coarse and jagged. Slugs and snails have soft, moist underbellies. Imagine trying to crawl across a floor covered in broken glass. You wouldn't do it, right? By creating a thick, 2-inch wide moat of jagged eggshells around your most vulnerable plants, you create a physical barrier they simply won't cross. It's a permanent, non-toxic security system that actually improves your soil as it eventually breaks down. Now, here's where most gardeners get it wrong. They think eggshells are only about calcium. But there's a hidden booster inside every shell called the inner membrane. That thin, papery film is packed with collagen and protein. If you're just washing that down the drain, you're missing out on a massive nitrogen boost for your compost pile. I know. It sounds like a tiny detail. But in a high-performance garden, those tiny details are what separate the weekend hobbyists from the master harvesters. I've seen compost piles that were stuck and cold suddenly heat up just by adding a bucket of unprocessed, membrane-rich shells. It's like throwing kindling on a fire. But you have to know how to layer it, or you'll just end up with a smelly mess that attracts every raccoon in the neighborhood. I know this sounds like a lot to take in, but stick with me, because once you see the bird buffet hack, you'll never look at a cracked egg the same way again. It's a win-win that helps your garden ecosystem and saves you a fortune on birdseed. Now, if you think feeding your plants is the only way to win in the garden, you're missing half the battle. We need to talk about the bird buffet secret. Most people spend a small fortune on birdseed and suet, especially during the spring nesting season. But here's the kicker. Those mama birds are desperately hunting for calcium to make their own eggshell strong. If you take those toasted shells we talked about, the ones you've crushed into small, pea-sized bits, and toss them in your bird feeder, you're going to see a literal feeding frenzy. You aren't just being a good neighbor to the local wildlife. You're inviting a specialized security team into your yard. Birds that come for the calcium stay for the pests. They'll scour your plants for aphids, caterpillars, and beetles while they're there. It's a natural, self-sustaining loop that costs you absolutely $0. But what about the bigger uninvited guests? I'm talking about deer and those pesky neighborhood cats who think your raised beds are a giant litter box. This is where the scent shield comes into play. While we usually want to wash our shells to keep things clean, if you have a deer problem, you actually want to leave a little bit of that raw egg residue on some of the shells. Deer have incredibly sensitive noses, and the faint, sulfurous smell of a drying egg is a major red flag for them. It signals that something is off or decaying, and they'll often skip your hydrangeas for a snack elsewhere. It's not a 100% force field, but when you combine it with the jagged texture we used for the slugs, it makes your garden a much less attractive place for them to hang out. Now, I want to give you my Super Soil Master Mix recipe. This is how you take everything we've talked about and turn it into a powerhouse foundation for next year's harvest. I never just throw shells into the dirt. I double up. I take my fine eggshell powder and mix it 50-50 with used coffee grounds. The coffee grounds provide a slow-release nitrogen boost and a bit of acidity, which helps break down that calcium powder even faster. It's a balanced, black gold cocktail that will make your soil look like something out of a professional nursery. You've got the calcium for cell wall strength, the nitrogen for lush green growth, and the grit for better drainage. And the best part? It didn't cost you a dime at the garden center. You're literally turning your breakfast trash into a high-performance engine for your vegetables. The real secret to a smart senior garden isn't about working harder or buying the latest gadgets. It's about being observant and using the resources you already have in your kitchen. Every time you throw an eggshell in the trash, you're throwing away a little bit of your garden's potential. I've seen people transform their entire backyard, doubling their yields and cutting their fertilizer budget to zero, just by mastering these 7 hacks. It's about working with nature instead of trying to buy your way around it. I know some of this might sound like extra work, but once you see that first basket of heavy, rot-free tomatoes, you'll never go back to the old way. You've got the tools, you've got the knowledge, and now you've got the white gold sitting right there on your counter. If you're ready to stop being a consumer in the garden and start being a producer, make sure you've grabbed my free Garden Gold Mine checklist in the description below so you never miss a step in the process.